Hi, this is Yaro Stark, and welcome to the Entrepreneur's Journey podcast. Today on the line with me, I have a very special guest who I'm excited to interview because he's done something that I think a lot of people would love to do. He's reached a point where he's separated himself from his business, and he calls himself a virtual CEO. Now, it's no small business either. He actually has 300 employees, so it is a hefty-sized company that is doing big business, but most of his job nowadays is actually starting new businesses, which I think as an entrepreneur is something we all love doing. So I'm looking forward to delving into the background of tonight's guest, which is Chris Ducker. Hi, Chris. Thanks for joining me.
Hey, Yara. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
So I need to know a little bit more about this company of yours right now before we look into your background. Is this something that started from nothing and then you slowly built up yourself? Like, how did you get to 300 employees?
With a lot of headaches. It was. It has been something that has gradually progressed over the last 5 years or so. We started out with 7 employees, and we're in the outsourcing industry. We're an outsourcing service provider based here in the Philippines. So we started with 7 employees. 2 of them were myself and my wife. So we had 5 real employees, if you want to call it that. And by the end of the first year, we were up to about 70. The second year, we had gone to about 100 or so. We're now sitting at just over 300 5 years later. So it's been a very slow, gradual growth. There were a couple of little spurts, but for the most part, it's been nice and slow and steady, which I prefer. I'd rather be growing like that over a period of years than sort of having massive growth spurts. It would scare me a little bit.
I think our definition of slow and steady might be different, Chris. I don't know if 70 employees in 1 year and then 100, 300 is my idea of slow growth. But you sound calm and collected, like this is normal. So
it is actually quite slow for this industry, for the outsourcing industry here in the Philippines. It's quite slow. I mean, I believe the largest company over here has something like 10,000 employees, which is a U.S. outsourcing company based here in the Philippines. So, I mean, there are some. We would class ourselves at 300 employees. We class ourselves at a medium-sized outsourcing company. There's a lot of little small ones which don't really survive all that long, quite frankly. But there are some very, very big ones as well, several thousand employees. So, yeah, it might sound a little larger than you'd be happy with or comfortable with, but for us, it's still, over here in this industry anyway, it's relatively small.
Okay, well, I guess everything's relative, right? So
that's it.
Now, you came to my attention through several people, actually. There was Gideon Shalwick, who you've interviewed before, and there's Pat Flynn, who recently used your services to find himself a virtual assistant. And it's safe to say that I've known you as a guy who helps internet marketers in particular get themselves some virtual assistants, an outsourcer who does various tasks for them as an online entrepreneur. Now, I'd like to know, though, a little bit more about your background before we reach the point what you are today. We know you've obviously got a successful company, but have you always been an entrepreneur? Did you go to university? You have an accent, so you might be living in the Philippines now, but you haven't always been there. Can you take us back to maybe you graduated high school or your first business or something like that?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I did not go to university. I did further education in the UK. And by the time I was 18, I was on the telephone working part-time during the daytime, doing telemarketing for a local classifieds magazine. I was tending bar and mixing cocktails, doing my best to try and be as handsome, as sexy as Tom Cruise in his cocktail movie. But yeah, I mean, it was really it was in my sort of very early 20s where I got employed by, at that point in London, a relatively fresh young publishing company, and they were based in a very corporate environment where they were focusing on corporate workwear and things like that. And that company got bought out by a much larger company in the city of London called Hemmings International, who I then went to work with for a couple of years. But that entire sort of period in time was about 6-7 years or so. Within that time, I knew that I had that entrepreneurial streak in me. I was, and I haven't mentioned this actually on many interviews that I've done before, but I'm a huge Hong Kong movie fan, or I was a huge Hong Kong movie fan. I used to love all the Jackie Chan, the Jet Li, and the Bruce Lee, and all those guys and everything. And so what I did when I think it was around 96 or so, I started my first ever, what I would class as my real first ever entrepreneurial venture. And that was I published, being that I had some publishing background and some contacts and things like that, I published a magazine that was aimed towards enthusiasts of Hong Kong cinema. And at the time in the UK, there were a couple of people doing kind of similar stuff, but I took it to the next level. And in 1997, I flew to Hong Kong with a video camera, a bunch of calling cards, and a return ticket for 10 days later. And my intention was to basically just go knocking on the door of all of the film companies asking whether I could interview anyone. And obviously there were some names that I went after particularly, but ultimately I went in and within 10 days or so I had interviewed around 8 or 9 people. Some were actors and actresses, some were editors or producers, and I had a Chinese person with me who was doing a lot of translation, but a lot of the interviews were actually done in English. And so I brought that home, and that gave me content not only for the magazine in terms of quote-unquote exclusive interviews, but then I also put together a video documentary, which I called Hong Kong Superstars, which led me to come back to Asia more and more and more. And that was the entrepreneurial bug. That's where it all happened. I ended up selling that magazine to a company who ended up doing absolutely nothing with it, which to this day... I know. To this day, I still cannot figure out why they offered me the money that they did. But trust me, after doing it for just 3 years, it was good enough amount of money for me to say, yeah, sure, no problem. I sold it. I was apparently going to stay on as editor at a magazine for a couple of years, but one thing led into another, and they never did anything with it. So that kind of ended that period. And at the same time, I was still working full time. I still had my, my full-time career job, whatever you want to call it. And there was a couple of personal changes in my life. I lost my mom. I went through a very horrible divorce. I got married very young and went through a horrible divorce and ended up coming out to the Philippines to work for one of the large banks over here to train their telemarketing outfit. And that's what brought me to the Philippines 12 years ago.
Okay, I just have to know, because of a personal curiosity, a little bit more about this magazine, because I love the publishing industry. I've loved magazines ever since I collected, video game magazines during the Nintendo and Sega era, before we had all these newfangled PlayStations and so forth. I run a website today that's like an online magazine, but it's a lot easier than publishing a print magazine. And a print magazine is like, I think they're beautiful. I think it's one of the most wonderful forms of media we have, and it still is today, I think. How did you do that as like a young guy? Was it one person? Did you just sort of have a word processor and you typed it up and printed it out and handed it out? Did you have distribution? How did you do that?
Well, actually, when we first started, it was very much along the lines of a bit of a fanzine. And I can't remember. What computer did I have? I can't even remember what I had. I think it was a crummy Acer PC, the thing, ran at a very slow speed, and
probably like a 386 or something back in that time.
Yeah, literally, and I had a dial-up account. I built my first website to help promote the magazine, and it gained some popularity, and I was lucky. I mean, it was tough. The printing side of it actually wasn't that hard. It was the actual putting the magazine together. And once we went from fanzine, and what it was actually, we used to print it out and photocopy it. And, I used to just give them away at film fairs and stuff like that to begin with. And then I started going up a notch, and we ended up doing like a multi-page A5 color fanzine, which was printed on nice paper. It was very thin, but it was nice glossy paper, and it was color, and there was lots of cool photos from the movies that I would get, my friend over in Hong Kong to ship over that you couldn't see anywhere else, and all that sort of stuff. So it was cool, and it just grabbed people's attention. And the difference between doing that and doing the full-blown magazine, the type of magazine that you see on the shelves, and we went to about, I believe, 6 or 7 issues now. It was published every other month. So there were 6 episodes, six issues in a year. I think we went a whole year or a year and a bit with doing that sort of full-size magazine. The printing side of it wasn't tough because I had a lot of contacts within that industry. So I just called on a few buddies, got people out to dinners a couple of times and got the deals I needed to do to be able to print it, at the price where I could make money on subscriptions and things like that. The tough part was filling it, quite frankly, with content. And at that point, I couldn't do it myself anymore. So I went through the classifieds of some martial arts magazines back in the UK to see if anybody was selling movies. And it was, it was real heavy on the bootleg side of things back in those days and things like that. So there was always film enthusiasts that were, just blatantly pirating films and getting them out there and, for £5 here and £10 there, and uncut Bruce Lee films and all that sort of stuff. So it was relatively easy to find people that were enthusiastic about the movies. And then, I was able to convince a handful of them to write a few articles. And it was just one of those things where, we would collate everything together, send it across in a FedEx package in regards to all of the images and everything that needed to be scanned, and it would get to a designer, he'd put it together, and we'd get the printed issue. And it was so cool to be able to get that box, that first box with the new issue. I used to love opening up that box and seeing the new issue. It was great.
I can imagine that would be a lot of fun. Talk about a tough business, though, to cut your teeth in that one. That's challenging. Okay, so you found yourself in the Philippines after some tough experiences in your life, and you're still an employee. So you're helping with telemarketing for an American company operating a telemarketing base in the Philippines. Is that right?
It was actually for a bank that was based out of England that had a presence here. Yeah, but fundamentally you're right. Yeah.
So, how did you obviously fell in love with the place because you didn't leave, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's funny. I mean, I think when I first came here, I didn't think that I would be here 12 years later. I figured I'd do, I knew after a few weeks that I liked the place and it was cool and everyone was so friendly and everything was just so darn cheap compared to back in London. And, you'd go out and have a great time, and I was a newly single guy and all that sort of stuff. So it was cool, and I lived a great, kind of single guy, kind of bachelor lifestyle for a couple of years or so. And then I met the lady who was going to be my wife, and that kind of just turned it around. At that point, I figured, well, if I'm getting married to this lass, so I better start looking at doing something a little bit more than just being an employee. So that's when the entrepreneurial blood started kicking in. I used to do a little bit of consulting work here and there as well in regards to marketing and branding and stuff like that, because I had all that background with the publishing side of things. So it just sort of everything kind of just fell in place 5 or 6 years ago, and we started the Live to Sell group, and the rest is a little bit of history, as they say.
The Live to Sell group, what's that?
Well, the Live to Sell group is the group of companies that I now own. We started off with just literally Live to Sell Inc. So Live to Sell Inc. was basically an outbound telemarketing consulting company. So we would work with predominantly US-based companies, a little bit in Australia, a little bit in the UK, but mostly in the US. And we'd be that foot through the door. So, we would do a little bit of lead generation or some appointment setting or database cleansing. And we still do all that stuff now as well. But there are also other companies under that group umbrella now where we have the virtual staff finder, which is where we hook up busy entrepreneurs and online marketers and bloggers and things like that with home-based virtual assistants here in the Philippines, which I believe is the service that you referred to in regards from Gideon and Pat using them before. And then we also have yourwebpa.com, which provides project-based outsourcing such as ebook design and SEO services, article writing, niche site creation, and that sort of stuff as well.
So it sounds like you've really leveraged your location, because being in the Philippines, everyone nowadays is outsourcing to the Philippines. You were in a great position geographically to gain from that. But that's not like the be-all, end-all answer to having a successful business. Can you tell me a little bit more about how you went from, let's say, quitting your employment as a person working for the bank in the UK to starting your own business? Was it was there an overlap where you were doing both at the same time, or you just one day decided to quit and then start something new?
Yeah, I mean, I'd actually done a little bit of work as a consultant for a company that was based out of Miami for about 6 months or so.
How did that even happen?
Well, that came about. I was involved locally here with not involved, but I was friends with a guy here locally who owned a DRTV company. So the direct response, you see the infomercials selling all types of crap, like 3 a.m. sort of thing. So he would fundamentally, either source or invent these, if you could call them products. Some of them were a little ridiculous, but then shoot the infomercials right here in the Philippines, wow. Edit them all together right here in the Philippines, and then he would go out to all the big conferences around the world and tout them to distributors in different countries all around the world. So there was 2 or 3 major industry conferences, and he knew I was a pretty half-decent sales guy. So he said, look, I'm going to Vegas. There's a big conference. Why don't you come over? You can put on a T-shirt, get behind the booth, and see whether you can sell some of this stuff with me. I'll pay for your flight, pay for your hotel, pay for your gamble a little bit. We'll have some fun. Why don't you just come over, spend a week with me in Vegas, and we'll see what happens. So that's exactly what I did. I figured, hey, it's a free trip. It's Vegas. Let's do it. So we went over,
you weren't
and I ended
yet,
up.
Were you?
No, I wasn't married at that point. No.
Hence it's more appealing.
Right. So. So I go over to Vegas. I write about $250,000 worth of dollars of business within a 3-day period for him, which sounds like a lot, but he wrote about $500,000. But he was more than happy with that. And whilst there, I met a guy who owned a company based out of Miami in Florida, and we just stayed in touch. He's an older guy, but we kind of just hit it off. And unknowingly, he was also in the process of looking to try and kind of revamp his brand and his marketing a little bit. So he hired me as a consultant a couple of months later. And I worked with him pretty exclusively in terms of consulting for about 6 months or so. But I learned so much from this guy. But unfortunately, so much negative stuff. I learned how not to market, I learned how not to rebrand. I learned how not to run a company, how not to treat employees, how not to take care of people that were helping you make millions of dollars every year and all this sort of stuff. He was a super nice guy, but he was a real a-hole of a guy to work for. And what I did, I leveraged the opportunity where I was making some very good money with him on a month-to-month basis in terms of retainer, as well as a little bit of commission. I then started off lift to sell, very small. At the beginning, we had enough room for about 30 employees in the office. We had 7 people that we began with. I was with him for another couple of months, and then I ended that relationship to focus entirely on lift to sell, so that I could really take it up to the next level. So that's to answer your question in a roundabout, horribly long way. I hope your listeners are still tuned in. That's how I went from being quote unquote an employee to being a full blown entrepreneur and just focusing on my own stuff.
It sounds to me like the idea of hiring people, and I don't know if it's because you're in the Philippines or not, but it seems less daunting the way you say it, just because, we started off with 5 people, or, you went from being an employee to instantly having people working for you. And for a lot of people working online, they never get employees. They might have some contractors. I'm certainly the case. I'm still yet to have a full-time employee on salary. That's daunting. It's usually a case of cash flow being an issue because you have salaries to pay. So if you're not bringing in money, how did you juggle this? You build up some capital first, so you had some savings in case things didn't work. What was the plan?
I did have savings. Like I said, I was paid quite handsomely to do what I was doing for this guy. I mean, we're not talking millions of dollars or anything like that, but I had a little bit of money saved up, and I also brought on board a silent partner so I wouldn't have to pay for everything right up the front. I ended up paying him what he had invested back within the first 18 months. So he was then kind of out of the picture. He got a nice golden handshake from the partnership and everything. But I knew pretty solidly that it was all going to be down to me. So I didn't want to end up giving him 50% of the profits forever. So before it got too big and too successful, I ended that relationship in a nice way and everything. For him, he was never really interested in the growth of the company or getting involved in the operations of it or anything like that. For him, it's purely just coming on board to make some cash. So I gave him a lump sum. He got out of it, and from about 2 years onwards, it was nothing but me. But it was funny. I mean, and it's funny how you mentioned, like, 1 minute you're an employee, the next minute you're an employer. It really did happen like that, because the way that I ended things with the guy that I was doing some work with in Miami was I was actually in Miami whilst they were building out the office here in the Philippines. And it was all nice and, everything was cool and everything. We didn't sort of shout and scream at each other or anything like that. But fact of the matter is, I flew from Miami, landed in the Philippines on a Friday, and then on a Monday, I was doing interviews to hire the first batch of staff.
Okay, so I'm seeing there, obviously there's a connection between the consulting you were doing for this fellow being a nice sort of kickstart to a business. But there's a big difference between consulting here and there and then hiring people. I mean, I know there's so much to study about how to find good people, and now you're in charge of 300 people. Like, how have you gone about this process of, I believe, rapidly hiring people and growing a business? I should actually clarify, what year are we in when you actually started doing this hiring?
It was 2007.
Okay, so it's 2012 now, just January, and you've got 300 employees. So within 5 years, you've gone from nothing in terms of employees to 300. And, to be honest, it didn't sound like you have a ton of experience running a fairly hefty sized business before you started this one, which has grown rapidly, in my opinion. Did you get lucky? What's all this? What's naturally confident? Where's all this coming from, Chris?
I think confidence plays a big part of it, and I certainly didn't start it for it to remain small. I can tell you that right now, because I'd been involved in the outsourcing industry for some time here in the Philippines, and I'd seen the boom that the outsourcing industry had experienced in the country. And it is very much now the destination of choice for pretty much anything and everything in the outsourcing game. So I knew full well when I started with just, the room for 30-odd people that I would easily be able to grow the company. Did I think it would grow as large as it is now today? No, I certainly did not. But you know what? You get a couple of, and there's always an element of luck involved. I believe if there's anyone out there that says that there isn't with what they've done to become successful, I think they're just blatantly lying to themselves, because there has to be an element of luck. Because the 2 or 3 clients that grew with me wouldn't have grown with me. They could have decided to grow somewhere else and make someone else's company grow and flourish, but they decided to go with us. And I believe that's a little bit of luck. Out of all the websites in the world, they decided to send an inquiry from my contact form on my company's website. They probably sent it to a few others as well. Maybe, yes, I did convince them a little bit. I did a little salesman on them and all that sort of stuff. But yes, there was certainly an element of luck in there. But my old man used to say to me, if you work hard, you'll never have to worry about work. And that kind of has that little bit of an employee mentality in there. But everything I've done, both as an employee in the past and now as a boss, I do with that, kind of adage in the back of my head all the time, because I still work my ass off now today. I work very, very hard. And I don't look at having 300 employees. I look at fundamentally supporting 300 families. So I take that responsibility not lightly in any way, shape, or form. So I guess, yes, there's definitely confidence in there. I knew that we could grow if I worked hard on it. I had some great help with the wife, believe it or not. There's a saying out there, you shouldn't work with, children, animals, and wives. So, I kind of risked it a little bit on that one, but she's great. She certainly helped me get it to where we are. I wouldn't be able to do it without her. And, I guess it's just been a combination of all those things kind of just align nicely, and a little bit of luck, man. You got to have some luck. You just have to.
Okay, well, it sounds like you're pretty good at two things, Chris, if I listen to this. You're good at getting clients, and you're good at hiring good people.
Yes.
So given those two things in mind, can you maybe take us through from this starting point, your office with space for 30, but 5 initial employees, 2 of them being you and your wife, correct?
Mm-hmm. Correct.
Take us from that, and how did you get your next bunch of clients, as well as how did you manage the need to hire employees? There's a juggle there. There's got to be a balance, right? Because your cash flow needs to work out so that when you get a new client, you've got the staff to service them, but you don't hire the staff before you got the cash from the new clients.
Correct. Well, and the outsourcing industry, there's a lot of different ways that you can pay for outsourced services. We decided very early on, actually after losing a little bit of money, not a lot, but we decided very early on that we were going to charge our clients in advance for their, for the work that we were going to do for them. So we would charge a month in advance every single month. So let's say new client comes on board, 10 employees required for a telemarketing campaign. We invoice that client, we sign contracts, the money comes through to our bank. At that point, we hire. So we're not actually employing anyone until there's work for them to do. And that is still the case to this day.
How can that work given... you must have an amazing hiring process to get good people, or have you got a great system now? Because telemarketing, in my knowledge, requires unique scripts for the service that you're selling or the product that you're selling, a training process for those employees to learn how they're supposed to interact, and not a simple process. How have you managed to do that?
Well, I've been in and around or on the telephone my entire career. So in terms of the scripts and things like that, 9 times out of 10, the clients will actually have scripts in place if they need telemarketing done, or even, we do a lot of customer service and, other types of support services like chat support and things like that nowadays as well. But ultimately, I can help people tweak their scripts and things like that as well. The training, in terms of the recruitment side of things, we made mistakes. Of course we did. There's no way that you can, grow a successful company, I feel, without dropping the ball a few times and learning by those mistakes. So we certainly did. We certainly hired some bad apples, which, put a few spanners in the works and things like that, but we got rid of them and we rehired and we tweaked our hiring process, our recruiting process. I now have a team of about 10 in terms of my human resources department, who are consistently interviewing on a day-to-day basis. Working for our company here in Cebu City in the Philippines it's an aspiration for a lot of call center people, because a lot of call centers here, they have swing shifts. There's that graveyard shift, then 2 weeks later they're working during the daytime and stuff like that. And there's a number of things that we do that enables us to attract the right people without any major headaches. And we're known as a very, very good employer here locally. So we don't have a big problem finding people nowadays. Back then, we didn't have that reputation. So it was a numbers game. We'd interview 100 people, we'd hire 30, we'd train that 30, and out of that 30, we'd put 10 people on that campaign.
That sounds a lot of work, though.
A hell of a lot of work. Hell of a lot of work. But you know what? I had a lot of good help. So, one thing I have been able to do is hire really good quality upper and middle management. For some reason, I've been able to get lucky on that. And I have some great people to this day now still working. Some people have been with me for 4 years. That first year was really a big learning curve. But since our first birthday and onwards, I've been very lucky with hiring the right people and taking care of them and making sure that they're trained and developed properly and things like that. And that goes right the way up to my COO, who is an American, who I hired at the beginning of last year to come and join us. And he now fundamentally runs the company on a day-to-day basis. I'm still involved in the growth strategies and the marketing and the sales side of things to a certain extent, but he fundamentally runs a company now.
Okay, so it sounds like a wild ride. I have to admit, it would have been interesting to see that first year in particular. I can only imagine you get a client who suddenly says, we need 10 people, and then you go, okay, let's go find 10 people. We just billed the guy for a month's worth of fees. we've
Right.
taken their money, we have to deliver a service, and you probably had a deadline, like he wants people to start
Oh,
making
yeah.
phone calls
Oh, yeah.
or doing chat by this time
Right.
frame, and you've got no one. You got an office with chairs and desks, right, ready to have
Yep.
these people do the job, but you don't have people. I mean, that's pretty scary.
It is pretty scary, but you know what the thing is, in this country, the outsourcing industry and the call center industry is the number one fastest growing industry anywhere in the country. It doesn't matter what city you're in. And we're in Cebu City, which is the fastest growing economy in terms of an economic zone here. There's been more hotels, more office buildings, more restaurants and everything built in the last 7-8 years than they have done anywhere else in the country in terms of, square footage, if you know what I mean, geographically. So working for an outsourcing company or a BPO or a business process outsourcing company, as they're known a lot more here, working for a BPO company is really, it's a given. Like, people want to come and work here. We pay better than most local companies. We have better benefits. It's just a better working environment. You get the opportunity to be trained by, not only fantastic local talent, but also foreign talent as well. And a lot of local companies can't offer that stuff. And not only that, take an industry such as nursing. There are hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of new nurses graduating every single year here in the Philippines. That's a fact. Thousands of them all around the country. But a lot of them, once they get that degree and that nursing degree, they realize that it's not all cut out to, they're not really cut out to be a nurse. They get a job in a local hospital, they work 14-hour days, they only get 1 day off a week, and at the end of it, they've only got the equivalent of $150 in their pocket after taxes for a month. Right. So you look at that, or you can come and work at a call center or an outsourcing company such as mine, make 3 times that amount, and only work 8 hours a day and have your Saturday and Sunday free. It's kind of a no-brainer. So I would have thought, out of 300 people working for me, I reckon about 30% of them are probably nurses, and I'm being deadly serious. Deadly serious.
You could start a medical outsourcing service pretty quickly then, couldn't you?
We could do that. We could start that up pretty quickly.
Okay, I'd like to talk about your other projects too, Chris, but before I do that, I'm just a little curious about the marketing side of things as well. I get the picture of how you get people. It sounds like it's a bit of hard work, great environment, good managers. But tell us, how did you get clients keep coming in the door? Because you're obviously in the Philippines, but you're you're taking on clients from, I'm assuming more so America, but you're not there. So you must be relying on online marketing more than anything, or are you actually doing some telemarketing to bring in telemarketing customers?
We have a very small internal telemarketing team of 3 people. They work very, very specific lists, usually created. I'm not going to give too many of my secrets here in case one of my competitors comes across this, but they're usually created from things like conferences and publication databases and things like that I can, get my hands on. But ultimately, probably something like, and I'm not exaggerating here, 80% of the inquiries that turn into clients come from our online activities. So we do a lot of SEO. It's a highly, highly competitive market from an SEO standpoint. We do a lot of SEO. We do a certain amount of social media. And we're lucky where we get a very steady stream of inquiries coming not only off the website, but also through our toll-free number in the US, where we do a little bit of radio advertising, a little bit of print advertising, and things like that as well. But ultimately, a very large majority of lead to client conversion comes from the online activities that we do.
And early on, was it like, because before you had this team of 3 and you had this online presence? Because I'm assuming you would have had to build up your SEO over time and build up your social media. And when it came time to do radio, you would have had to go and find some services in the States to handle that for you. What was, like, how did this progress? Where did you start?
Well, we started off, we had a website before the company even opened its doors. There was a website up and running. And it's quite funny, actually, whilst I was in Miami for, that last trip over there before coming back and starting the company here, our website was already live. And, I jumped on the what's the quickest way to get to the top of Google and everything. And back in them days, we talk like it's 20 years ago, but 5-6 years ago, I discovered through reading websites and stuff that writing a press release was a great way to get to the top of Google or Yahoo, even if it was just temporarily, to get your name out there, because the search engines liked the fresh new content. And so that's exactly what I did. I wrote one press release. I distributed it to, I don't know, whatever it was, 5 or 6 different sites. We got a little traffic. We had a couple of inquiries, believe it or not, before I even got back to the Philippines to open the doors of the building. Wow. So it just, and that is absolutely no bullshit. I swear that's God's honest, because I was in Miami calling people up, looking at, trying to work those leads myself as I was on the same time zone before I even got back to the Philippines. And one of the guys that I called didn't become a client immediately, but he did about a year later. So before we were even up and running, I'd closed the client who ended up working with us a year later. But
amazing.
Yeah, it's funny stuff. But even myself also, I used to pick up, sometimes I'd be browsing the website. This is probably the first year or so. I'd be browsing a website, come across a site, look at it and think to myself, could they outsource ABC, XYZ? Probably. And I just pick up the phone and cold call them, just pitch them out of the blue.
Now, you're obviously experienced at doing that, given your background.
Yeah.
Is that just a case of, how do you get to the important person you need to speak to when you do something like that?
A lot of the time people try tricks and tactics and stuff like that, but a lot of the time if you're just very direct, it'll work, because, back in those days, we were also calling on fundamentally small businesses. Now we don't work with so many small businesses. We now tend to work with people that sort of need 10 or 15 people as a minimum, which is very much the medium-sized companies in the US. So, but back in them days, we'd work with somebody that wanted one telemarketer or 2 or 3 or 4, whatever. So, I used to just get on the phone, and if there was a gatekeeper there, if there was a secretary or receptionist or whatever, 9 times out of 10 there wasn't. Because in the US, people who own companies and run companies also pick up the telephone themselves as well. So I was lucky. A lot of the time I'd get the decision maker on the phone straight away. But, a lot of the time people try tricks and stuff. It really doesn't work that often. And you should just be very blunt. Hey, I'm calling from blah, 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 blah. We do this, this, and this. And I'm pretty sure this morning or after lunch, that sort of thing. They can't say no. They've got to say one or the other. So that's the option close. I used to use that to great effect.
Chris, can you just repeat that option close? Because it cut out just as you're about to explain it.
Okay, so the option close is very simple. You've got either an appointment you want to make with someone, or you want to get in front of someone or send something through to somebody. If you're on the phone to somebody and you don't want to get a no from them, one way to avoid that no, and as telemarketers we always want to do that, so one way to avoid that no is to turn around and say, so when would be a better time for me to be able to call you back and discuss that with you, Mike? Would it be tomorrow morning before lunch, or maybe in the afternoon? What's best for you? So they've got to say before or after lunch. They can't say no. You're not giving them a chance to say no. That's the option close.
You're so evil.
Come on, man, it works. And it's not like I'm bullying people. Psychological
marketing tactics, as usual.
something like that.
Yeah.
But, it all comes down to just, and genuinely, everything I said is true. We can help people with their marketing costs and things like that. And a lot of the clients that we work with have started with, only 2 or 3 employees with us, and they're now, have 25, 30 people, a few of them. So, they've grown their businesses at the same time as we've grown ours. And that's why I always say I don't look at what we do with our clients as a vendor-client relationship. I look at it as a business partnership, because if we do a good job for them, they'll be happy, they'll grow, and they'll put more business our way. So it's really that simple.
Okay, so you've grown your company, you've got some marketing going out there, bringing in new clients, you can hire people as soon as you get the clients. So it's almost like a no risk. Well, there's a risk, but you certainly don't have a cash flow issue because you hire once the cash is there, which is fantastic. You grow your company, you reach a point where you've got systems in place, you've got a COO now doing the operations daily. I'm assuming that was a fairly big change as well to make the decision to bring that person on board. Can you maybe tell me a little bit about that point where you thought, I no longer need or maybe want to be involved in the daily operations, or maybe just break it down how you extracted yourself from the business so you could start these other projects you've got.
Sure. Well, in late 2009, my wife gave birth to our third kid, and there was a pretty big gap in between the second and the third, about 10 years to be precise. So the first obvious, reaction was, "Oh, holy cow, it still works." How did this happen? This was a result of a good night out. What's going on here? So that was the first reaction. But the other reaction was that, at that point, I was still very much still growing the business a few years back, and still doing a lot of it myself. And so what happened was within the first year of my youngest's life, even though I had taken my foot off the gas a little bit and was spending a little bit more time at home, I wasn't spending that much more time at home. And I was so busy with my career with the first two. And when I say the first two, I do apologize. I'm now married for the second time. So, hence the fact that I've got a youngie now and the other two are slightly older. But fact of the matter is that I decided that I wanted to be there more often with my third child, and who is now 3.
Okay.
And so,
just clarify, Chris, the first two with your first wife?
Correct.
And they're in England?
They are based out of the UK, but they also come to the Philippines several times a year to see me as well.
Gotcha. So when you said you were growing your business, were you traveling back to the UK to visit your kids? And
of course.
So you're juggling all of this at the same time. So you must have.
Oh, yeah.
You must have been thinking, how can I do less very early on as the company started to grow?
Oh yeah, and I mean even before I started up the company, I was still going backwards and forwards between the UK and having them come to the Philippines regularly and everything as well. So there was always a big juggle there. But yeah, I mean, it was the end of 2009 where my son had just hit his first birthday. And I sat down and I said, right, I can't do these 12-hour days anymore. This isn't right. We've got to the point where the company's doing relatively well. I need to start moving myself out of it bit by bit. And that's when I launched my blog, Virtual Business Lifestyle. And when I launched the blog, I launched it with the view of having it almost as a bit of a online journal, so I could chart my course to becoming what is now the virtual CEO. So it was going to be a 1-year-long goal, and I broke that goal down into mini goals. Some of them were monthly, some of them were quarterly, and it was simple stuff like taking myself out of every single email loop in the company, not doing the training myself anymore, hiring another person or another 2 people to do that, not doing the final interviews anymore, hiring a HR manager to do that. And I had to relinquish a lot of, I guess, for want of a better term, control over the day-to-day stuff. And as entrepreneurs, we're naturally micromanagers. We have what I call superhero syndrome, where we think we can do everything better than anyone else in the entire universe. And so it was tough. But yeah, of course you can. Of course you can. But I didn't want to be there anymore. I wanted to get out. I wanted to spend more time with my family. I wanted to spend more time focusing on what I really enjoyed doing, which was starting and growing businesses and not running businesses. And that's what I've done. So in late 2010, I hit that goal. The whole of 2011. In fact, late 2010, I began Virtual Staff Finder. And then at the end of 2011, I began Your Web PA. So I've launched 2 businesses in around about a year, plus carrying on running Lift to Sell. But, Lift to Sell, I work maybe 2 or 3 hours a week on Lift to Sell now. Like I said, my COO is fundamentally running the company. I found him after a year-long search. I ended up flying to the United States and doing, whilst on a business trip, and doing interviews with about 5 or 6 candidates that I'd met, the majority of which were through LinkedIn. And he came to us with 15 years call center management experience. He was a little older than I wanted to hire. He was in his mid-50s, but he certainly had the experience, and he had the passion, and he had the drive, and he's been with us now for about a year, and he's great. And we continue to grow slowly but surely. I've been very lucky. I mean, I don't class everything to nothing but hard work. I class the majority of it there, but I know that a lot of the things that have happened, particularly in the last 18 months, have happened with an element of luck involved. But that's fine. I'll take luck any day. I don't mind that.
Yeah, well, it sounds like something that I know a lot of people, especially if they currently run a small to medium-sized business and they want to extract themselves, that process doesn't sound like it was quick by any means. There's a lot of things you need to take yourselves out of the loop, as you said, from, which is challenging. A lot of people never get to do it either unless they sell their business. They're always involved with it somehow. Could you maybe think, what was the hardest part of this process, and what would you maybe be able to do better now that you've actually gone through it, if you were talking to someone who was about to start the process?
One thing I would have done was start a blog sooner. And I'm serious when I say that, because having virtualbusinesslifestyle.com has enabled me to put a face to the businesses. And I think people want to do business with people. In fact, I know they do. They would much rather buy something from somebody they know than buy from somebody they don't know. So, and I don't pitch anything on Virtual Business Lifestyle as a blog. I mean, obviously I talk about my businesses here and there, but on the whole, I'm just talking about, how to do this and how to do that most of the time. But I know full well that there have been a number of people, particularly with Virtual Staff Finder and Your Web PA, with those two slightly newer companies, which are slightly more online based. There is absolutely no way in the world that they would have been, or they have got to, and hopefully will continue to be as successful as they have, if I hadn't have had my blog and that personal brand in place online. And I wish that I started my blog 2-3 years earlier, because I feel that I would have been at a whole different level, not just as an entrepreneur, but also as a personal brand myself as well, because I'm now known, as the outsourcing guy online, the virtual assistant guru, the blah, 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 blah. And if I'd have done that 3-4 years earlier, I would have beat Tim Ferriss to the whole virtual assistant thing.
Right.
I'm telling you, I was hooking entrepreneurs up with virtual assistants before the 4-Hour Work Week was even published. So, it's not like they were new. It's not like Tim created this huge industry. It was already in place. How do you think he found them? Mm-hmm. So that's the thing I kick myself for, is I wish I started the blog sooner.
Now, if the person, though, wasn't interested in actually building a brand as a, they don't want to teach other people how to do what they do necessarily, so they might be thinking, why should I start a blog? I'm thinking perhaps the accountability is beneficial to talk about. Let's say I own even like a used car sales person. You're thinking about how they can extract themselves from being the used car salesman. Would starting a blog be something they necessary to do, or is there anything else you could maybe tell them? You think, if just for extracting yourself from a small to medium-sized company?
Well, I think if you're the owner of the company, the biggest problem you're going to be is letting go of the reins. And I think that, particularly what worked well for me within that 1 year where I wanted to, try and remove myself from the day-to-day side of things, I broke things down to smaller goals. Or smaller milestones, where it didn't feel at the time when I was going and achieving each of those milestones, it didn't feel like I was letting go of my baby all at once. It was just bit by bit. And that certainly worked for me, and I'm sure it's probably worked for a few other people out there as well, no doubt. So, I mean, if you've got a small to medium-sized business and you're looking to try and extract and remove yourself from it from a day-to-day basis, I think the first thing you should really do is sit down and make a list of the stuff that you just don't like to do, because in this day and age, you don't need to do it. Whether you have to hire someone and lose a little bit of profit margin to get that off your plate, just do it. Because you'll find that if you have more time on your hands to do the stuff that you do enjoy, not only will your business succeed even further, but you'll also be a much happier entrepreneur yourself, which will enable you to, get yourself out there more often, start new things, and, just see the world a little bit more. So I think breaking things down into smaller, kind of maybe slightly more manageable and easier goals to not only attain, but then also to kind of let go of, is probably a good starting point.
Okay, so you managed to extract yourself, and obviously part of the reason why was to be with your family, but you also felt the need as an entrepreneur to be a creator, not just an operator, in the sense that you've built a business, now you want to do new businesses. you sounds like you stayed within the virtual, outsourcing kind of field, and you wanted to help other online entrepreneurs bring outsources into their business to free up their time. Is this just something that you're really interested in and you like working in?
I love it. I think it's a great industry. I think it's a great concept of being able to leverage your time as a business owner. And I think that, through books like The 4-Hour Workweek, which is a great book, these kind of books and manifestos and things like that are out there. I think the new age entrepreneur, as I tend to call them more and more nowadays, are slightly less resilient to be 100% in control of everything. They're quite happy to let other people take the reins on certain processes within their business. And I mean, it's just great for me personally, when I receive an email, and you must know what this feels like. You get an email from someone who says, just listen to podcast episode X. Fantastic. Thoroughly enjoyed it. You've totally made me, start to think about the way that I'm doing things in my own business. I just wanted to say thanks for everything you do. Those kind of emails right there. I mean, if that doesn't get you going and turned on as a podcaster or a blogger, then there's something wrong with you. You know what I mean? And for me, the ability to be able to help someone not only grow their business, but as well as, kind of almost create an entrepreneurial lifestyle that they truly, really do love to live. For me, I get way, way more pleasure out of that than I do by, adding another 30 employees. That's a fact. I'll take the 30 employees all day long, but and the profits that come with them. But ultimately, I really enjoy the stuff that I do online with the other companies and the blog and things like that. That's really where my where my passion is now as an entrepreneur.
Can you break them down? Like what happened? You separate yourself from your outsourcing business, your 300 employee business. So did you just go home and play with your kid, or did you build a website for a new service straight away? Like what happened to set up these new services?
Well, I mean, like I said, I started the blog, which was really the catalyst for it all. And, again, I wanted to set that up as a journal of sorts. But I started to get more and more traction, and, people were interviewing me about the whole virtual CEO goal and stuff. So I was lucky to get some different traffic and, links on some pretty prominent blogs and things like that. And then people wanted to know more. How do I do this? How do I, remove myself from being stuck in my inbox 6 hours a day, Chris? Because you've done it. Tell us how. So I write a post on how to kick the crap out of your inbox. It's one of the most successful posts I've done. How do I start a niche site for the first time? I've never done it. You've never done it until you did it 6-7 months ago. Can you break that down and show us how you did it? Sure, no problem. So there goes my, second 200-plus comment blog post. So it's enabled me to really kind of build up that, not necessarily a personal brand, but a brand in relation to being just savvy in regards to business in general. And then you kind of couple that together and attach that with the outsourcing background and the marketing background that I have. And I've just been very blessed to be able to put together a couple of really cool services that people obviously enjoy utilizing. And again, if I can help people along the way, for me, that's just a bonus. Am I doing it to make money? Absolutely. First and foremost, I'm a business guy. I always say I'm a businessman first, a blogger second, and that will never, ever change. I do everything I do to make money, but I do it with the view of wanting to help people at the same time.
So give us a breakdown of what you've been mentioning them throughout this interview. You've got virtualbusinesslifestyle.com, the blog. Yep.
And it also has the accompanying podcast, which is at episode 50. You're going to be episode 51. Mm-hmm. So there you go. Virtualstafffinder.com is the matchmaking service for entrepreneurs that want to work with home-based virtual assistants here in the Philippines. And we've just celebrated placing our 400th VA through that service, which is a massive, massive milestone as far as I'm concerned. And then we have yourwebpa.com, which is the project-based outsourcing. If you need a site designed or some articles written, ebook design, that sort of stuff.
Okay, so all fantastic websites. I think for the people listening to this call, they would be very much interested in everything you just talked about, certainly how you've separated yourself from your business, but also how they could get themselves a virtual assistant and outsourcing some of those other tasks as well. So it's a hot subject. Tim Ferriss is certainly to blame for popularizing it. And,
he is. And actually, when I spoke at Blog World in LA last year on the subject of working with virtual assistants, the first slide of my presentation was a picture of a beach. And the slide had "Thank you, Tim" written on it. I give a massive amount of respect to Tim Ferriss for what he's done, not only for this industry, but for entrepreneurs all around the world. He's got them very much thinking outside of the box, to use a little bit of business speak. A massively popular, very successful book, and obviously for very, very good reasons. But yeah, he certainly has helped people along the way, that's for sure. But yeah, we'll blame him for everything.
We should. I have to admit, I was a bit surprised. I think Tim was also surprised at how popular the 4-Hour Workweek has become. I think he was expecting a successful book, but not to the extent that he certainly had. So he certainly hit a need that a lot of us probably didn't realize we had until it was presented in such a concise manual like that. And obviously people have been living it before Tim wrote about it. Like you said, you've been doing it. I certainly was doing it before Tim had done it and with his book. But he brought it into the limelight, which is great for you because you've got some businesses that help people to lead to that lifestyle. So that's fantastic.
Absolutely.
Chris,
Absolutely.
I think go ahead. Yeah.
No, I was going to say, so Tim, if you're listening in, thank you.
Yes. And there's an interview with Tim in my podcast if you want to grab that from the archives.
There sure is. I've listened to it already, buddy. I listened to it a while back.
Well, everyone else listening can have a listen to it. That was done a while ago, too. So it's just after his book came out. But, Chris, we're focusing on you now. So let's wrap it up. Where are you today? Like, you're obviously interested in growing these businesses still, and your telemarketing outsourcing service, which you haven't mentioned the name of yet. We should plug that quickly, too, in case people do want a telemarketing outsourced service. What's that called?
Well, that is literally the Live to Sell group. So they can get that at live and then the number 2 sellgroup.com.
Okay. So.
Oh, and actually also something pops into my head, depending on whether this is going to be going live at any time soon, but in about 2 weeks from now, I will actually be launching a new blog and a new podcast, which is outsourcetothephilippines.com. It's not live right now. There's just a squeeze page up there right now, but that is going to be the blog where I talk about nothing but outsourcing for entrepreneurs and business owners. So if there's anybody out there that might want to just kind of tune in purely just for the outsourcing stuff, it's outsourcetothephilippines.com. That will kick off soon.
I have to admit, the Philippines is a hot topic in terms of outsourcing. I've noticed that probably the last year. It's just where everyone recommends and everyone's going. And I guess we should just briefly, before we hang up this call, Chris, why is that? What's with the Philippines?
I think it's a combination of two things. First and foremost, the Philippines is actually the 3rd largest English-speaking country in the world. Not a lot of people know that.
Yeah, that's the first
they have. I think it's got to be the US and I don't know, Canada, I guess. I don't know.
The UK's got more people.
Well, UK has got but I mean, geographically, I guess Canada's bigger than the UK, I guess, right? But anyway, I mean, population numbers to one side. I don't really know why. The statistics are there. It is what it is. But they are all educated literally from elementary level in English. And everywhere you go, there's this real kind of Western Americanization to the country. And you've got lots of little strip malls everywhere, just like they do in the US. And you go to like a multiplex cinema, there'll be 20 screens, and 18 of them will be Hollywood movies, and the other 2 will have some cheesy local comedies or action flicks or something on there. There's an American flag on the 100 Philippine peso bill. So it's really westernized. The English that they speak here in the Philippines is very American, twangy kind of sounding, which is why it's such a hot spot for voice outsourcing. And that's the first thing. The second thing is because I believe that because of the global economy being the way it is today, people are starting to look to outsource more and more and more. And in regards to English speaking itself, there's only really India and the Philippines to choose from. And I don't know about you, and I mean absolutely no disrespect to any Indians listening in, but I would much rather listen to an American twang Filipino English accent than I would do a more kind of strict, monotone Indian English accent, because I've also been called by Indian telemarketers in the past myself, and they just don't sound as fluent as you would want them to sound if somebody was trying to call you to sell you something. So it really is the destination of choice, mainly because of the English structure, and also the communications here is very, very good. I mean, we got T1 and E1 lines up the yin yang over here. So it's if you spend the money, you can get everything you need to be able to make the business happen.
Now, why is the Philippines, I guess, a cheap place to outsource to still? Because we're looking at $500 a month for a full-time employee. That sort of wage is quite typical, right? Yep.
I mean, cost of living here hasn't changed. It hasn't got any more expensive. Maybe for people like myself who are foreigners that are living here that were 10, 11 years ago getting 55 pesos to the dollar, who are now getting 43 pesos to the dollar, yeah, we hurt a little bit. But in terms of the locals, hasn't really changed. Hasn't really changed at all. And it is still a developing country. And with that comes obviously a certain amount of poverty. And because of that, things are cheap. And, it's just one of those things. I mean, the prices for hiring virtual staff, particularly home-based VAs, has increased a little bit over the last couple of years. Not a lot, maybe 10, 15% max. But the only reason they've increased is not because the cost of living has increased here and the Filipino VAs need to offset that difference. It's increased because the Filipino VAs are getting smarter. They know that people want to outsource to the Philippines, and therefore they're charging a little bit more than what they did a couple of years ago. So good luck to them. That's what I say.
And do you see a point, though, where the Philippines will develop so that there isn't, I guess, a benefit to outsource? Like they'll be on parity with the American dollar?
It's going to be tough. I don't see it happening anytime soon. No, it'll be tough.
Okay. Well, it's a political discussion we can have another day anyway, I think.
Probably is. Probably. That's another hour, that is, at least.
Sure is. It's an interesting debate that's been, ever since outsourcing came along, there's always been that sort of, are we exploiting people? But there's a massive article on my blog people can jump into with over, I think it's like 500 comments. It just out of control. But I want to thank you because this has been a very interesting interview because of your background, the path you've walked with your entrepreneurial story. I think in particular your process to extract yourself from your business is something that a lot of people would like to learn about. So I certainly encourage people to go check out the virtualbusinesslifestyle.com blog. That sounds like it's your oldest blog that sort of tells the story from the beginning, certainly as you were chronicling your own process to separate yourself from your company. So I think everyone should check that out and they'll enjoy it. And I look forward to seeing what else you get up to with this free time and obviously your dedication to spreading the word about outsourcing. So thanks, Chris.
Thank you, Yarrow. It was a pleasure to be on and been a big-time listener and fan of yourself, so it's a real honor.
And for anyone listening in, if you'd like to grab more interviews like this one we just did with Chris, there's a great back catalog of interviews with entrepreneurs and internet marketers at my blog, entrepreneurs-journey.com, or just Google Yarrow, Y-A-R-O, and you'll find it that way. And I'd like to thank Chris again for joining me on the call, and I'll catch everyone soon on a future call. Bye-bye.